sponsored by the Joint Landowners Coalition of New York. My name is Scott Bukowski, and we're also here with our speakers. We have Mike Hatchie from Chesapeake, Bob Williams, who is a member of the Joint Landowners Coalition of New York, and John Holko from Ioga, New York. Well, I'll give you a little bit more information about each of our speakers, but thank you to our speakers for coming tonight. The purpose of tonight is really to talk about natural gas drilling and give everyone an opportunity to ask questions and be educated about this process. We hear so much information about things that this industry will bring to our community and to our state, and what we want to do is come here and give you a landowner perspective, industry perspective, by the way, that you don't always hear. Sometimes you'll hear perspectives from people who say that we're very nervous about this coming to our area, we're not familiar with it, but what we intend to do is really talk about those issues, and if you have questions, give you the chance to ask those questions. So we're going to have our presentations tonight, but then there'll be a question and answer session after that, and we can talk about that some more. A little bit about the Joint Landowners Coalition of New York. Our organization is a nonprofit organization, represents over 38 landowner coalitions throughout our state. We're working with over 800,000 acres of landowners who have pledged their property for oil and gas development in New York. The mission of the organization is to foster, promote, advance, and protect the common interests of the people as it pertains to natural gas development through education and best environmental practices. And as such, this is what we're doing tonight. This is part of one of the things that the JLC does, is that community outreach and that education process. So the JLC is the leading statewide group looking out for landowners and community interests in natural gas development. The JLC is not an organization that leases property. That's not up to us. We're not replacing anybody's landowner coalition. We're not involved in lease negotiations. What we're doing is working with the coalitions to help educate and provide support to them. The JLC is involved in a number of efforts. So tonight this is one of them, but we're very active in advocating for best practices. We want to make sure that the industry comes here and they're doing things like closed-loop drilling and eliminating the use of open pits. Pad lining. We'd like to see pad liners out there. Meters. We're looking at the metering program. We want to make sure that landowners are being paid appropriately for the gas that's coming out of their property. And the meter is that first test on how you will be paid. We are also working with our local elected officials, state and federal elected officials. We talk to them on a regular basis and really give them a view that they don't often hear. They are hearing a lot from organizations that do not want to go forward with drilling in our state. They hear from the industry, but we've got to make sure that they understand from the landowner perspective. Because although the industry and landowners agree on some issues, we don't agree on all issues. When we go to talk to our legislators, we're talking about things that affect us. Things like our landowners who are having difficulty paying their taxes. And they have the ability to go forward, market their property, but they can't. And what about that ability to market our minerals? They're ours, it's our land, and nobody can take those rights away from us. Those are things that we push with our legislators all the time. Don't dare touch our property rights. We're talking about those issues, and as landowners, those messages are resonating with our legislators. I think just more than any of the messages that they hear out there. We hear people calling for delay frequently, that we should delay this process, and what harm does that do? Well, tell that to a dairy farmer who's struggling and can't pay bills, and now is considering bankruptcy. And what happens when you put a landowner in that position? What happens is that suddenly they start looking at marketing their property to somebody who comes to our state and our community to invest from outside. Who is going to be the best steward of that land? The third-generation dairy farmer or some investor from Oklahoma? We know what the answer is. And so we're talking about these delays, but these delays are not helping our state, they're not helping our communities, and people have to understand that there are these effects. It doesn't matter that Marcellus has been there for millions of years. There are real lives out there being affected by these delays in New York right now. We're partnering tonight with Ioga, New York. Ioga, New York represents more than 400 individuals and companies engaged in the oil, gas, and natural gas industry. They promote the common interests of its members and represent all industry sectors. Ioga, New York members are committed to operating safely, efficiently, and with great care and stewardship for the state's natural resources. Ioga, New York and its members public about the positive impacts the oil and gas industry has had and will continue to have on New York's economy and quality of life. Let me just go back for a second here, because I want to talk to you about the JLC, and oftentimes when I have a new client that comes in that has not really been up to speed on what's going on in the natural gas industry, one of the things that I tell them to do is go to the Joint Landowner Coalition website. It is a great resource for information, the JLCNY.org. So go to that site, become a member, sign up. You might have already registered to receive the newsletter. Sign up for that newsletter, sign up to receive emails so that you can understand what's going on and you can participate in this process. You may be having a landowner rally soon. If you are signed up as a JLC member, receiving the newsletter, then you'll have that opportunity to participate in that rally. Let's see here. Also, if you've got other questions not answered by the JLC website, just talk to one of the JLC members. The president of the organization is Dan Fitzsimmons. Okay. We've got yoga and now our panelists. I'm just going to give you the description of everyone's background so you understand the expertise that each speaker is bringing with them tonight. John Holbrook, sitting down at the end, has more than 29 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. He's president of Lenape Energy, the parent company of a group of energy companies, including Lenape Resources. He's a board member of the Independent Oil and Gas Association of New York, and is currently the secretary of the association. Mr. Holbrook has a Bachelor of Science degree in Petroleum and Natural Gas Engineering from the Pennsylvania State University. His experience encompasses all aspects of oil and natural gas field operations, including drilling, production, pipeline development, natural gas marketing, and market development. We also have Mike Gatchie with us here. Mike Gatchie is a local government specialist for Chesapeake Energy Corporation, Eastern Division, where he works to ensure communication and engagement between the company and the municipalities in which Chesapeake operates. Mike is involved in grassroots efforts to inform public officials, landowners, business leaders, and other stakeholders regarding the process and benefits of natural gas development in New York. Prior to joining Chesapeake, Mike worked as the assistant director and later director of planning, housing, and community development for the city of Binghamton. He's also a graduate of Illinois College, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science, and later attended Binghamton University, where he earned a Master of Public Administration degree. And then in the middle we have Bob Williams. Bob is Director of Environmental Studies at Barnes-Williams Environmental Services in Binghamton. He's a member of the Windsor Gas Lease Coalition and a member of the Board of Directors of the Joint Landowner Coalition of New York. His undergraduate studies were at Cornell University and the State University of New York, Oswego, and he received his master's degree from the University of Vermont. Bob has over 40 years of experience in environmental assessment and impacts and has been a tremendous help to the JLC and to New York landowners. Okay, where are we in New York? We know that we are on hold right now. Right now we're waiting for the DEC to complete the SGEIS, the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement. Back in 1992, when the first generic environmental impact statement was completed, it had taken about 100,000 gallons of water to drill a well. Now, of course, we're looking at millions of gallons of water with high-volume hydrofracking. There's a lot of drilling going on in our state right now, but the governor has said if you have to use more than 80,000 gallons of water, then we want that to stop until the DEC finishes this study. And so the DEC is looking at water withdrawals, we're looking at water disposal, filtration, those issues. And that's that document that we've been waiting for. The document that came out in September of 2009 that was over 800 pages. It'll be well over 1,000 pages by the time the DEC comes out with it soon. But that's the document that will control gas drilling in our state. When's it coming? Governor Patterson last year issued Executive Order 41. And in there he said, on or about June 1st, 2011, the department shall publish a revised draft SGEIS and accept public comment on revisions for a period of not less than 30 days, and may schedule such public hearings on such revisions to be conducted in the North-South Shale region and in New York City. So, Governor Cuomo has acknowledged that order as well, so we know that the SGEIS is supposed to be coming out soon, on or about June 1st. A few weeks ago, we had a committee for the Joint Landowners Coalition. We met with the DEC Commissioner, Joe Martinez. The first thing he said was, thank God for that on or about date. Then he said, no question that the SGIS, the next version of it, that next draft, is going to come Now, it's not going to be the final. You know, we've been waiting for the final to get here for 3 years. We're going to see another draft. What we said to Joe Martins when we were there is, look, make sure that when that document comes out, that it's a document where the comments are limited to the changes. We have an 800-page document, but just limit the comments to those changes. And put out a document, maybe a red line document, so everyone can see exactly what those changes are to make it easy for everyone to comment. We've got a minimum 30-day comment period. Joe Martin, keep the comment period to 30 days. Don't extend it. And they have the possibility of having public hearings. We know what public hearings are like. We've seen them with the EPA. We've seen them with the secret process in Binghamton. We've seen it with the first SGIS was being commented on. For all services, really very little, if any, benefit that comes from those public hearings. So we've asked that they keep those public comments to writing. You need to ask too. Go onto the JLC website and you will see that we have on the site the ability to sign a link and an email directly to Joe Martin, voicing your view that this is how this process should go forward. Make these changes to the SGIS, but limit those comments to the order. Let's not let this thing go on forever. And let's start issuing permits in New York. There will be changes. The technology will change. As drilling continues, they will find different conditions. The different conditions here in Tioga County might not be the same as in Broome County, and they're certainly not the same as what they see in the Barnett and Fort Worth, Texas. As those conditions change, the SGIS will need to change. And so change those things as we go, but let's get started with the process. So go on to the JLC website, send that, and it's very easy. Put your name, your address in, hit the button, and Joe Martins will hear from you about the fact that you believe this should move forward. There's also a letter on the JLC website to Governor Cuomo, asking Governor Cuomo to move this forward. Take a copy of that letter, add whatever you like, but let Governor Cuomo know that landowners, communities, we want to see these things move forward within our state. Okay. Having said that, the first speaker will be Mike Hatchie from Chesapeake. We have a little switch to do on our computers, and then Mike will get started.
Scott mentioned, my name is Mike Hatchie from Chesapeake County. What I'm going to do tonight is essentially what we call Drilling 101. What it does is it walks through the process of finding natural gas, the drilling of wells, completing those wells, and some of the benefits we're seeing from that activity just over the border in northern PA. Certainly, I go to many meetings and I know that this is a contentious issue. What we look to do with this presentation really is just to describe the process, talk about how things work, show you, I have some animations I'll show you that help you visualize the process, and just help you understand it better. Because I think that in the end, if we can all understand the process better, we can start to, if we're skeptical of it coming to New York State, if we know more about it, perhaps we can understand why there's a need and a desire to have this, per se. For those who are supportive of the industry, just learn more about what's going to be potentially happening on your land. Now, I'll get started soon, and throughout the presentation, I think we're going to wait till the end for Q&A, because I think typically we start asking questions throughout the presentation, and they can go on for hours. So I've pegged this to be about 30 minutes or so, maybe a little bit shorter, to try to go quick. I'll start out essentially with an advertisement for Chesapeake Energy. We're the second largest producer of U.S. natural gas. We're the most active driller. We have some of the best assets in the industry when you think about crude reserves of natural gas and acreage. Typically in the four major shale formations, we are either the number one or number two leasehold owner. For example, in the Marcellus Shale, we have about 1.7 million net acres leased. Chesapeake Energy is based out of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. We have approximately 10,000 employees, so we now have over 1,400 employees working in Pennsylvania. Some of those being New York hires across the border and working PA. Now this slide will show a map of the United States, and the areas highlighted in red represent the major shale formations in the country. We show this map just to give you an idea of the scope and size of the Marcellus formation as it compares to other major shale formations. For example, here's the Barnett Shale in Texas, a rather prolific natural gas formation. You can just see, based on the size and total acreage of Marcellus, why it's being considered a game changer in domestic natural gas production. We'll zoom in on that formation and show what we call the prospective area of the Marcellus. About 15 million acres, running from West Virginia, touching Ohio, running through Pennsylvania alone. And here's a picture of a dog fracturing site. It's not nearly as exciting as the drilling process, but you see a lot of equipment in the center. The blue pump trucks are used to pump the water and high pressure into the well. We have a blender to mix the chemicals, sand and water. We have storage tanks for water, storage tanks for sand, and the data monitoring band, which is where all the activity is monitored and controlled. So a lot of equipment is brought on site, but again, remember, it's a short-term activity, only about 7 to 10 days per well. Now in the animation I showed, I talked about the casing of each well. This slide really shows in better detail how we actually case our well. So we use essentially 4 layers of steel pipe embedded within each other within cement. So we'll come in initially drill about 75 feet deep and line the well with what we call conductor casing. We then embed that conductor casing into place with cement by pumping cement down the center of the pipe, plunging it down through, and it fills up back up the side between the groove and the pipe, embedding that conductor plate casing into place. We then drill down about 1,500 feet and line the well with what we call surface casing. And that's also embedded into place with cement, doing the same process. We then drill down about 2,500 feet and line the well with what we call intermediate casing. It's a new layer of casing. We added that about a year ago. And it's also embedded into place with cement, pumping cement down the pipe, filling back up the gap between the pipe and the area. And then we'll line the well from the surface through the curve into the total depth with production casing. And we are cementing that production casing back up the surface. And within that production casing, we'll line the well with production tubing, which is another layer of steel pipe in which the natural gas is collected. So when we're finished, we have as many as 7 layers of protection with heavy gauge steel pipe and cement surrounding that well. Now there's a lot of talk about, well, what's in that hydraulic fracturing fluid? What are you pumping into that well? And I think most everyone knows that the fluid contains water, sand, and chemicals. 99.5% of that fluid is water and sand. And here's a list of about a dozen chemicals that Chesapeake has typically been using in our wells. And in northern PA, we've actually been able to reduce the number of chemicals down to about half a dozen. So we're using acid, a friction reducer, a scale inhibitor, an iron control, a corrosion inhibitor, and an antibacterial agent. Each of these chemicals serves a specific purpose within the well. And the number of chemicals certainly is in the hundreds or over thousands of chemicals being pumped into the well. It's half a dozen. Now, at this point, I'm going to show another animation which describes in more detail the hydraulic fracturing process.
In order to maximize the production potential of the well, the shale formation will be hydraulically fractured. In preparation for the fracturing process, the casing will be perforated in the horizontal portion of the well using two conveyed perforating guns containing explosive charges. The perforated intervals are spaced approximately 50 to 80 feet apart and create a connection between the production casing and the shale formation. With the initial perforating complete, the tubing and perforating guns are pulled to the surface, and the workover rig is replaced by a hydraulic fracturing crew consisting of a number of high-pressure pumps and blending equipment. This equipment will pump a mixture of water and proppant, usually sand, through the newly created perforations in the production casing and into the shale formation. First, water is passed from a water storage impoundment into the blue working tanks depicted on this location. The water is then pulled into a hydration unit, which provides the ability to gel the fluid before it is transferred to the blender. At the blender, proppant and a small amount of chemicals that aid in the fracturing process are added. The blender transfers the fluid and proppant mixture to the pump trucks through the low pressure side of the manifold. The fracturing pumps increase the pressure of the fluid, sending it back through the high pressure side of the manifold to the fracture where it enters the well. The entire fracturing process is controlled from the treatment monitoring pad. When the fracturing fluid reaches the perforations, pressure builds until the shale formation fractures, allowing fluid to enter into the formation. Additional fractures are created along natural zones of weakness in the shale. These fractures are contained within the shale formation, well below the ground. After an initial stage of fluid called the pad is pumped to create a fracture area, proppant is added to the fluid and is distributed throughout the newly created fracture network. At the conclusion of the fracturing treatment, the proppant allows the fractures to remain open so that the natural gas can flow into the production casing and to the surface. This completes the first of several stages in the fracturing process. This process is repeated by lowering and pumping down an isolation plug and perforating guns into the wellbore to complete the next stage of fracturing. This time, the tools are conveyed into the well by a wireline unit, which allows the fracturing process to proceed much faster and more efficiently. A lubricator is used to control the pressure of the well while the operation is taking place. On the bottom of the perforating gun, a composite bridge plug is placed to isolate the newly fractured zone. This ensures that the subsequent fracturing treatment is contained in the current zone. The perforating gun is again fired at roughly 50 to 80 foot intervals, creating a connection between the production casing and the shale formation. The fracturing process is then repeated until all of the stages are completed. A typical shale well has approximately 8 to 12 stages of fracturing. At the conclusion of the fracturing operations, the isolation plugs are removed from the well and production can start. The produced fluids are diverted through a flowback manifold into storage tanks. The fluids are then recycled or disposed of according to state and federal regulations.
One thing I forgot to mention, and it's relatively new, so I sometimes forget to mention it. When we talk about the chemicals that are used in hydraulic fracturing fluid, we've been providing a list of chemicals for about 2 years now. And just about 2 weeks ago, Chesapeake joined about 24 other companies to disclose those chemicals on a well-site by well-site basis. It's through a program with the Groundwater Protection Council, and that well site is fracfocus.org. You're able to search by wells and determine exactly what chemicals were used in each of those wells. So this really mitigates those concerns about what are those chemicals going into those wells. We provide that information, voluntarily give that information so that landowners and the public can see what's going into the wells through the hydraulic fracturing procedure. Now, in hydraulic fracturing, we use about 5.5 million gallons of water per well. And when we talk about millions of gallons of water, it's a lot of water. And there are concerns about how much water are we using. And in a few slides upcoming, I'll talk about the efficiencies of that water to produce the energy we need. But I want to talk now about what happens to that water after we do the hydraulic fracturing process. pump the water down the well, fractures the shell. A few days after that procedure takes place, an initial flowback of water comes back up to the surface. We capture that water, and we put together a program called Aqua Renew, where we are able to recycle and reuse 100% of that water. So we filter and analyze that water and store it for the next time we have a stimulation process. We have that water available to use. This reduces the amount of fresh water we have to use, reduces the amount of truck traffic, and really anytime an industry can reuse its materials, it's saving some money, so there's a cost savings for us. And any water that's produced throughout the life of that well, if it comes up with the gas and separated out of the well site, we're actually recycling and reusing that water as well. So we are recycling 100% of the water through our operating program. I'm talking about water use in the 5.5 million gallons of water per well and how efficiently or how effective that is for producing energy. We first wanted to do an analysis of how is society using its water in general. So we looked at the states that comprise the Marcellus Formation. We came up with a pie chart showing how water is being used. 71.7% is being used for power generation. It's matters. 12% is being used for public supply. 16.2% being used for industrial and mining activity. And of that 16.2%, only 0.1% is being used by the natural gas industry for Marcellus shale development. So, although it sounds like a lot of water, 5.5 million gallons per well, and it is a lot of water, it's a tiny bit compared to how society in general. And there's also some concern about that, well, the water that we're using, we're pumping it into the well, a portion of that's coming back up, but a lot of that's staying underground, deep underground. So that water is essentially taken out of the hydrologic cycle, which means that water is no longer able to be used by human use. So what we've done, I did not do this, but some of our environmental scientists did this analysis, which basically looks at the combustion of natural gas and what happens when natural gas is burned. It creates CO2 and H2O particles, or water particles. So some smart guys came up with this analysis that showed that based on the combustion of natural gas at approximately, volume of water produced per million cubic feet of natural gas is about 10,675 gallons. So a typical Chesapeake Marcellus well is projected to produce about 5,200 million cubic feet of natural gas over its lifetime. So based on that data, it would take a typical Chesapeake well about 6 months to produce 525 million cubic feet of natural gas to produce the same amount of water that we've used for the hydraulic fracturing process. So by using that gas, by using it to heat our homes, to produce electricity, to power vehicles, when that gas is combusted, it is creating carbon dioxide and water particles, replacing the water that we've taken out of the hydrologic cycle, putting it back into the hydrologic cycle. Again, I did not do this, but it's a really interesting study. And also, we're using that water efficiently to produce the energy we need as a society. This chart shows for the 4 major shale formations how much water they're using per gallon to produce 1 million BTUs of energy. In the Haynesville shale, they're using just about 0.84 gallons to produce 1 million BTUs of energy. In the Marcellus formation, we're using just about a gallon of water to produce that same 1 million BTUs of energy. In the Barnett shale in Texas, they're using about 1.5 gallons of water. In the Fayetteville, we're using about 1.7 gallons. So we are very efficient in using our water effectively to produce the energy that we need. And other sources of energy use water for their production. So looking at this chart, you can see again the gallon of water used to produce 1 million BTUs of energy through Marcellus shale development. Look at coal, using 2 to 8 gallons or as much as 13 to 32 gallons of water to produce that same 1 million BTUs of energy. Conventional oil, using 8 to 20 gallons of water. It might be hard to read, but biofuels, using over 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 million BTUs of energy. So when we look at water use compared to the efficiencies of producing the energy that we need, our solid shale development really is an efficient and effective use of our water. So at this stage, we've drilled wells, completed those wells, and now we have gas coming through the wellhead. The gas goes through the wellhead to a piece of equipment on site called a separator. It separates any moisture particles that comes up with that gas and sends it on to an on-site storage tank. As I mentioned earlier, we are recycling that water as well. The gas then goes on to a meter and onto a major transmission line, such as the Millennium Pipeline. In order to get that gas to those major transmission lines, we have to install what we call a gathering system. Here's us installing a gathering line in Bradford County, PA last year. We try to bring the environment back to the same way it was before we were there. So once we drilled the 6 wells on a pad and produced those wells and have gas producing on site, we will actually come in and reduce the size of that well pad that we constructed down to about half its size. The rock surface we put down, half that will be removed and the original topsoil will be put back and revegetated. That will leave a small ongoing footprint producing gas for decades. Once these wells stop producing, we are actually bonded to make sure that the wells are shut in, all the equipment is removed, the native topsoil is again put back into place and revegetated, leaving no sign of us being done. I think I'm running short on time. I'll talk real quick about regulation. On the slide here, we show a list of just some of the federal regulations that the oil and gas industry has to comply with. And as we know, in New York State, we've had a moratorium in place for about 2 years as DEC comes up with a solid set of regulations to regulate the industry and make sure we're doing things to the standard that New York would expect. In order to meet those high standards, we actually have, of course, internal staff. We have a regulatory department, environmental health and safety department, and field safety staff. We deploy some of the best management practices in the industry, and we actually hire an outside auditor who comes onto our sites unannounced, and it basically lets us know if we're not adhering very strictly to regulations that we are guided by. Kind of wrapping up here, it seems like a lot of effort to produce natural gas, but there's many benefits to natural gas production. It's the cleanest fossil fuel. There's 80% less nitrogen oxide than coal. It's very carbon-light, producing 50% less carbon dioxide than coal, 30% less than oil. It has tremendous potential as a transportation fuel. There are currently about 8 million natural gas-powered vehicles worldwide, but there's only about 150,000 in the U.S., so there's great potential for natural gas as a mainstream transportation fuel. It has tremendous electricity generation potential. In the U.S., we produce about 30% of our electricity from natural gas, so there's definitely areas to improve electricity production. It's a great partner fuel as wind and renewable energy grows, or wind and solar energy grows. And it's very abundant. The 4 major shale formations equate to about 40 years of national supply. So we have this domestic energy source right within our borders. Now, there's been some concern lately about, well, how clean is natural gas? Is it really as clean as people are saying? And we've done some analysis which really pinpoints the comparisons of natural gas versus oil and coal. I'm looking at carbon dioxide production, for example. Natural gas is 44% cleaner. I'll go through all these. Carbon monoxide. Natural gas is far cleaner than coal. Production of carbon monoxide. So certainly, we believe very strongly that natural gas is the cleanest fossil fuel, and we're willing to provide any analysis or data that proves it. And wrapping up here, just some of our stats from Northern PA. Just over the border, we're operating quite heavily in some of Bradford and some other counties. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we have 24 rigs currently operating in Northern PA. We've drilled over 300 wells. We plan to do about 280 wells this year. So as I mentioned during the drilling part of the presentation, it takes us about 30 days to drill each well. So you figure number of how many wells they're going to do a year, thereabouts. So I've heard claims of tens of thousands of wells every year being drilled. Well, we're the most active driller. We're doing about 280 wells this year. We've grown substantially regarding employees. We now have over 1,400 employees working in Pennsylvania. That's up from 250 in January of 2009. We paid over $76 million in total wages in 2010. We've given out about $1.2 billion to landowners since 2008. We've paid over $400 million in contracts to Pennsylvania vendors since 2009. And that number is growing quickly. Some of that number includes road repairs. In 2010, we expended about $92 million repairing roads in northeast Pennsylvania. And we've given out about $1.5 million for our corporate giving programs to nonprofits, local agencies that serve everyone in the public. We give computers to schools and libraries, vehicles to EMTs. So we're very active at giving back to the communities where we operate. And the last stat here, I'm not from Bradford County, but Bradford County did lead Pennsylvania real job growth in 2009 with a net gain of 2,000 jobs. And I also heard last month that Bradford County had the lowest unemployment rate in Pennsylvania. So it's definitely proof that the industry is working and really having a significant impact on the economy in the areas where we operate. Thank you.
What I'm saying is, I think, I've spent a lot of time in the oil and gas industry in New York, and there's a real misconception. There's still people in Albany that have no clue that we pay taxes on oil and gas production. In your house, you probably get, if you own a home, you probably get 2 tax bills a year, one around September, one around January. I get about 350 in January, 350 in September, one on every single well. So that's how I can tell you that what I'm going to show you it's true. But what's happening, and Mike pointed to some of the things that's happening in Pennsylvania, but when we look at the economic impact, we look at the economic input. He's talking about the kind of money that Chesapeake's spending in Pennsylvania. If you're a landowner with land, you get a direct impact through royalties and bonus payments. What we're looking at is the 2,000 jobs in Bradford County, Pennsylvania. Then we have local property taxes, because there's a whole group out there that says, well, I don't care, because the only people that are going to make any money are the landowners that essentially have the land. Well, I'll show you, the impact is far greater than that. It's far greater because of the jobs, it's far greater because of the money spent in the school systems, the money spent in the restaurants, the money spent in the local businesses, but it just keeps growing. And everybody in this room probably realizes that it doesn't matter what happens, if you don't spend any money, nothing's going to grow. So the money has to come from someplace, and that's growth. Everybody talks about the long-term and full cycle impacts, and what's going to happen long-term. I can tell you, if we have no money, there will be no hospitals. Okay? There will be no health care. We won't have to worry about it. We'll all be, if we can't take care of ourselves, we'll all be done. So the truth of the matter is, when there's money and money flowing into the system, it benefits everybody. The economic impact. Here's what, this is some numbers they were giving me in Pennsylvania. $3.9 billion total value in 2009, $8 billion in 2010. These numbers are staggering. If you think about it, this is real stuff. $389 million in state and local taxes, $785 million in 2010. New jobs. How many jobs? What kind of jobs? Essentially, all kinds of jobs. From people working in restaurants to make up for all the people coming in, to truck drivers, to brake mechanics, to geologists, to accountants, any job you can think of ends up growing when this business comes in. Current data from Pennsylvania, I think this pretty much just came out. Everybody, you'll hear reports, there'll be people talking about all the people are from Texas, and all the people are from Oklahoma, and there's not going to be any New York jobs, there's not going to be any Pennsylvania jobs. The most recent data coming out of Pennsylvania, the Department of Labor and Industry report shows 71% of the workers hired are from Pennsylvania. 48,000 people hired in Pennsylvania since 10/1/2009. There was 9,000 new hires in the first quarter of 2011. 141,000 jobs related to Marcellus Shale, core, and ancillary industries. And Pennsylvania now. Of Pennsylvania's total workforce, 2.4% of people working in Pennsylvania work in the Marcellus or ancillary industry. That's amazing. 15 years ago, we weren't even doing this. Now 2.4% of people in Pennsylvania work in that industry. Now tell me how can somebody, I don't care if you have a PhD or an MS or whatever you want to have, how can somebody tell you that's not good? I mean, when I got out of college, everybody told me, I'll get a job. I got a job. So I won't look for a job. Well, I was one of the dumb guys. I got out of Penn State. All my friends went to Oklahoma. Someone went to Saudi Arabia, got a really sweet deal because they kept keeping all their money on tax and brought it back, made more money. I worked for a service company in the Appalachian Basin. But I lucked out because when all my friends were losing their jobs in the 80s, mid to late 80s, when the industry was going in the toilet, I was back here in western New York where I was the only guy that knew what I was doing. So I was lucky. I stuck around and ended up buying the company I was working for. So, opportunities do happen. Property taxes. This is key. I don't have a lot of slides. I want to tell you that the oil and gas industry in New York is taxed. We don't need a sales tax. The nice thing about property taxes, you have to realize the money goes back to whatever the tax is paid. So if the wells are drilled in your town, in your location, that money paid by that oil and gas company comes back to that town, that county, that fire district. I was lucky enough, Scott sent me some information on some local taxes. But what I had to do, since there's no drilling in New York, I had to say, okay, I need a comparison. As Mike showed us, it's happening just across the border. And as you can see, I want to show you something, because this is very important. And you guys probably don't know this, that there's this line right here, that at that point the Marcellus ends. There is no Marcellus in New York, it ends right there. So right there, so once you cross that little line right there, there's no more money to be made. That's what people were telling us. But I think maybe that's not true, because all this stuff's underneath the ground. It's got to go a little further than that line. So I said, let's take a look at what's happening in PA. Well, now Pennsylvania has put out a lot of reports on production and things that are happening. And they happen to have, on the DEP website, they have the data from July 1, 2009 through June 30, 2010. They have 12 months of production data. Okay? So we have real numbers. I mean, this is stuff that the companies are reporting. So I said to myself, okay, what can we do? I'm smart. I pay a lot of these tax bills, so I can see how they're calculated. I said, let's try to calculate what happened. So I took the 3 counties that are just across the border. Okay? Tioga, Bradford, and Susquehanna. They're not far from me. So what I did is I said, most of the wells in New York are going to be drilled horizontal. So a lot of the old grunt work, exploration work that's being done in Pennsylvania, they'll have a lot more information when we come to New York. So let's just say we're going to drill horizontal wells, which is pretty much what's happening now. So I looked at any of the wells that have more than 100 days of production. I wasn't going to look at 1 day, 9 million a day, and say, that was going to blow up in here. So I said, okay, let's look at everything over 100 days. Essentially a third of a year, give or take. And when I use that data, I come up with a weighted average daily production rate of 3,034 MCF a day out of those 101 wells. Okay, now I said, well, let's bring one of those wells and let's drill it in New York. Because I know we have to pay taxes. So now if I know we can drill a well here, I got an estimate of production right here. I mean, this number is telling me what's happening from those wells, and it may probably happen across that border. So I bring it into New York and I drill one well. Well, in New York, the property taxes are basically dictated by the state. It's in statute. We have to pay the taxes. It's paid on a unit of production basis. The unit of production in New York runs from the wellhead to a sales point. Could be a pipeline, could be a midstream line, could be a bunch of different points. But essentially, the unit of production covers the value of that well from the wellhead, from down in the reservoir, up through the well, through the wellhead, through the pipeline to a sales point. That's what the state law says. And each year, we provide them data, and they come up with the unit of production value. This happens to be the most current. This came out in February of 2011. So this is the 2011 value. And since we really don't have Marcellus drilling, what I used was sort of the other category, which was, And this is the number on the state rate. And you can go to the Office of Real Property Services website, look on the oil and gas section, and you can call this up. It's a nice little sheet, and it has these different categories. You look under other, you'll see the number $9.80 per MCF. I also said, well, you know, I got to figure out what the actual price of gas is, just in case I want to use it. So I did this report on April 28th, and the 12-month average NYMEX price was about $4.87 an MCF. Now you say, well, how can that be so different? Well, the difference comes from there's an averaging in the formula for the state tax structure. When we set this up, I happened to be part of the group back in the 80s that worked on this, we decided that the local property assessors, they didn't want gas prices to go this every single year. So we said, if we use an averaging, what will happen is we'll essentially average out that price, and we'll get a good, a little bit more stable. So if prices drop, if you're averaging 5 years, you're not going to have this dramatic decrease in property taxes. It would kill anybody trying to plan. So we decided the averaging would work. So that's what we did. We utilized averaging. And now, what I did, and this is where Scott and Kevin came in handy, they provided me a tax bill. And on your tax bill, you essentially have information. You have a tax rate per $1,000, okay? You usually have and sometimes the tax bills will say what your property's worth, okay? And then they'll have a taxable value. And the taxable value usually has a uniform percentage reduction. It doesn't range anywhere. Some are 100%, some are 75, some are 50, some are 56. But what I've learned is no matter what that reduction is, this number ends up coming to about $30 a thousand of real value in most of New York City, $28 to $30 a thousand. That's what the real value is. But it just so happens that in mine, I got a tax bill for the town of Owego, Tioga County, and the Owego Appalachian School, school district. And when you break it out, you have a county portion at $10, 10.78 per thousand. You have this recycled, and I don't know what these are. I didn't make this up. I just broke this down from the tax bill. And if you want to see the tax bills, I brought them with me. Then you have the recycling, whatever that is. You have a town-wide thing that's that amount. A part town, I have no idea what that is. You get the fire district gets this, and then you have a school tax of this. Okay? That's a good various number too. I can see why. Anyways, this is a beautiful facility. There is no doubt about that. So what I did in calculating this tax, and the way it's done for oil and gas producers is we have this average production. So we get a volume that's produced during the year. Okay? So what I did is this times 365 gives me this as an annual number. Now remember, unit production value, that's per MCF. So what I did is I take this and multiply that, and I get a taxable value. So now all of a sudden, I get the value, just like your house, and my rate, and now I get the amount of taxes I pay. So I have one well, okay, that's producing like one well in Pennsylvania, and I'm paying $344,000 in property taxes a year. Now that's not chump change. I mean, that's actually pretty good. So the real interesting part is if you had a town where you had, let's say you had a town or a county with some vacant land, something behind the bus garage, nobody's using, because I think they're using 2.5 acres. I say overall we use 6, which is access road, pipeline, location, whole spill. So my impact there is a little larger, but we can do this on a fairly small amount of land with one. But now, remember what Mike said. We can drill 8 of these. We can drill 6 of these, 5 of these, from this one spot. So this number becomes quite large. But if you drill one well on town property, and the town was terrible at negotiating because I know 12.5% royalty is nowhere close to where it is, but I'm just so old in New York, I won't give up on the money value. If you had a town, and that well would pay that much in property taxes, and we just calculated that. And then I figured that value that I said was right at $4.78 an MCF. Well, now that's what you get your royalty on, because you So you'd get that much in royalty, the town, if it was on town property. So if you did this one well on town property, you're looking at $1 million of total dollars the first year. Thought I might know, but there are people that are telling me, and I was in Albany the last 2 days, no economic value to oil and gas development in New York. Besides the jobs, besides the hotels, besides everything else, there's still no economic value. Now, I'm an engineer, so I can't stop with one number. I got to keep going. I got to say, okay, what if? Let's say, what if we started drilling? What can happen? Well, the tax bill that I got also contains other numbers. It contains, what do they call it? Bear with me. It's called, let's see here, tax levy. I assume that was all the taxes that are levied on everybody. So, I'm not sure, but let's hope, because, oh, God. There we go. That would have been really bad. I want to make this point. So what I said was, if you have $39 million in total tax levy, okay, how can we get rid of all the taxes so that you and every other homeowner in the town doesn't have to pay the taxes? Let's drill 115 wells and get $39 million in first-year property taxes. That's not bad. Oh, wait a minute. But if we drill it on town property, because does the town, maybe the town has 90 acres of land, so let's drill it on town property. Get 90 acres, let's bulldoze it, we'll drill it. And what happens is, if we drill all that on town property, we say we can drill 8 wells on a pad, okay, and we're taking up 6 acres. We use about 90 acres. But the town gets the royalty too. So not only do we pay $39 million in property taxes, we'll have an extra $77 million just to kick around. This is really all, this is it. Thank you. The point here is, don't let anybody tell you we don't pay taxes. Don't let anybody tell you that there's no value. Granted, I will guarantee you, New York State will regulate this so it is done correctly. No doubt about it. No doubt in my mind. I've been around long enough. Nothing's going to happen that they won't know about. If we can see this in the communities that can have drilling, it will have an impact. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I was talking to Bob Williams just before the program started, and I said, boy, it would be wonderful not to have no property taxes, but I would settle for no property increases. That would be fine, too. What we'd like to do now is open this up to questions. So if you've got a question, there are microphones on each side of the auditorium. Just take one of those microphones, and we can start our question and answer process. Right up here are the microphones. There's one on each side. Just walk right over.
You explained this very nicely to us. Have you explained it to Albany and those people up there? The same thing?
Well, we explain this every chance that we get. We have political consultants that the landowners work with. They're explaining it today, yesterday, all week long. There was a lobby day that just happened for the industry yesterday, where there were numerous meetings with our legislators. So meetings like this are happening throughout the state. They're happening in Albany. We're trying to increase as much knowledge about this as we can. So the answer is we're trying.
What don't they understand?
You'd have to ask them.
You got to realize that the majority of votes in New York State went here. That's a little bit of a holdback. But I think because of the economic climate, I think some of this is starting to make sense. And we can't let this pass. We've already missed some of the better opportunities. We missed a lot of the brick and mortar that's currently going in Williamsport. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff's not going to come to New York, but we can't let this
Good evening. I have a question about world gas prices and how it affects the royalties here for the landowners. Understand, and if I say something incorrect, correct me, because I'm not most knowledgeable about this. I understand the current price of U.S. natural gas is around $4 as a million cubic feet. And as I understand, that's about half to one-third of what it costs elsewhere in the world. Europe, I guess, is around $8 to $12. Possibly Asia's around there too. I understand that China's very interested in buying this natural gas, and that Chesapeake is preparing liquefied natural gas ports to ship this natural gas to other countries. What is keeping the U.S. price of natural gas so low? What will cause this price to increase? And how does that affect the landowner royalties in the near term and in the future? You understand that the gas prices are low, I would think that our royalties are not very high. And so, why is it so low? And when will it grow? And why will it grow?
Well, I think, pricing of natural gas, pricing of any commodity is supply and demand. That's the simple fact. Right now in the United States, you have to realize that without new LNG plants to try to ship it elsewhere, we have a fairly confined market. It's what we consume in the United States. Right now, the majority of our electricity is generated with coal. Okay, so natural gas is an industrial, electricity backup used for, chemical processing, things like this. So what has to happen is, historically, gas wasn't consumed a lot because nobody was comfortable that there was a long-term supply. Mike showed you in his map of the United States. What we see now with the development of unconventional shales is a good long-term supply. Now, the industrial users, the electrical generators, everybody will start to consume natural gas because it's natural, it's cheaper, it's cleaner. So it'll become a fuel of choice. And it also becomes a fuel of transition if we want to get green. So as the supply, as we start to use more, the price will naturally go up a little bit. But it's not going to get anywhere. I mean, on a BTU basis, you'd have to divide the price of oil by $5.60. Let's say $6 to get the equivalent price of a BTU of natural gas. Now, oil is at $100. Divide that by 5. Natural gas should be $20 on an equivalent energy basis. It's not. Okay? So immediately what happens is it becomes the economic fuel of choice.
There's a bill pending in the United States Congress right now to convert all commercial vehicles in the country to natural gas. That's something that would increase demand for natural gas in this country and would have an impact on those prices.
And the big companies like Waste Management now has made a press release. They're going to convert their vehicles to natural gas. If you saw schools, if you see UPS, Postal Service, people with routes that end up coming back to a central facility, if they start converting, the use of natural gas is tremendous. You wouldn't believe how cheap it is. The equivalent on a gallon of gasoline, natural gas is like, I want to say $1.25. Scott, is that right? Is that about right, $1.25? So,
yeah, I have a question for the gentleman from Chesapeake. Everything now is closed loop drilling.
Yes, I
No
don't
more pits anywhere.
We do not use those bits in our Marcellus operations. We've gone to that closed loop system where we contain that drilling mud within that system, filter out the cuttings, and then pump that mud back on the well and recycle and reuse that water as well. From that drilling.
A second question about fracking. Is Chesapeake looking into LPG fracking at all?
I came to a meeting here in this room about 3 or 4 weeks ago where a representative from Gas Frac came and did a presentation. We've looked into that. Obviously, anything that's new and proven, if you want to see proven results, I think he has about 700 wells, I think that you mentioned that they've done so far. So we will consider anything that will improve our process. I guess that's the best I can say right now.
But they are definitely looking into it.
We'll look into anything
trade-off in volume.
Other questions?
Well,
Hi.
Oh, we can start right over here with that first one.
It certainly would be a cleaner alternative for those in China, Japan, and Norway, who would be the recipients and the highest bidder for the natural gas, liquid gas being transported there from this area. Well, the picture of, I didn't catch your name, who just spoke,
John Holton.
John Hoka, paints a picture of a town which was laid barren with half of the well pad. My understanding is that it would be reduced to half the size after the process occurs. So if you have a number of well pads in the town of Owego, for example, that doesn't draw people into the quaint little village of Owego, for example. So you lay that town barren so that we have property no property taxes to do what with. It lays the land as a barren, unattractive site for people.
I think, let me just comment on that, because I did make a comment about drilling the additional wells and stuff. And I think what everybody can realize is there are areas that can be used. And Mike pointed out, in the stipulations in the SGEIS and in the state's guidelines, there's setbacks and there's other requirements, so that those sort of things, the perception that we're going to create this barren wasteland is, I think, a little bit stepping beyond what would happen under existing guidelines and regulations, because the setbacks, the distance you have to be from wetlands, the distance you have to be from buildings, the distance you have to be from roads, actually limits where you can locate wells and well pads. And they're usually going to be located in areas where, after they're reclaimed, they're not noticeable.
Thank you. I have two more questions, but I don't want to hog the mic.
Let me just respond to that too, because you can listen to us today about these issues, but I tell people all the time, get in your car, take a short drive across the border. You saw all those dots up there. You don't see, you have trouble finding where the well sites are. And typically, if we go down there to visit these sites, we find someone who can tell us where they are so we can visit them and see for ourselves what they look like. But they're not out in plain view, so don't necessarily take our word. Go there and see for yourself.
It's not the well site itself that I'm concerned about, but thank you. We'll have some.
Yes.
The process as described seems sterile and beautiful. I ran across a letter today from Mark Smith, who's a county commissioner in Bradford County, written to the governor, saying after issues arisen in Bradford County in relation to development of natural gas, I have a number of concerns. Well, water contamination in Bradford County is a real and serious issue that affects residents' quality of life, livelihoods, families, and property values. Water buffaloes, temporary water storage tanks, not only cling to people's front yards as a stark reminder of the extreme negative impact that natural gas development is having on the local community. I've heard I continue to see our county, township, and boroughs struggle with complex issues of development with no financial or logistical support from the Commonwealth. Emergency responders, volunteers, state and local police and dispatchers are working at a breakneck pace to respond to immense traffic accident increases, well site accidents, and other related issues. Politicians say, we don't want to kill the golden goose. I would like to state for the record, the golden goose does not exist, no more than the tooth-fairy, Santa Claus, or Easter Bunny. So how does that picture sit side by side with the perfect well site? I mean, something's happening, whether it's attributable to every industry has its accident rate, ours is such and such a percent, and it's, a fracking operation blew out of control, ran down across the farm, and who knows if that farm is usable for the rest of that farmer's lifetime. And one other thing, just in terms of statistics, landowners groups constantly point to the lack of hard evidence, and everything I read is anytime a gas company settles, that settlement has attached to it a non-disclosure clause. So we can't ever know the facts.
Well, one thing we've been doing in the last about 6 months, we've been bringing in our landowners on a monthly basis to talk to them. We have meetings, and in cases we'll have 300 or 400 landowners come to an auditorium just as this to hear their concerns, to talk about what's been going on, and to listen to if they're having concerns, if they have issues with things. So ways that we can communicate with our landowners, find out what they want to see differently, and implement those changes. We also have landowner relations departments, so we have people who will talk directly to landowners and listen to their concerns. A lot of the concerns are small local impacts, such as traffic, such as road impacts. There's no doubt that our process does impact roads, for example. Our sand trucks and water trucks do beat up the roads. I did mention in the presentation that we spent millions of dollars repairing those roads. We set up agreements with the local towns so that it's essentially a contract that if we damage a road, we will have to repair that road. So those are the concerns that we hear dealing directly on a daily basis with landowners. So we also hear a lot of really good things. We hear business owners who are expanding. I get calls almost daily from New York companies, small businesses in New York, wanting to service the industry. I get calls daily from nonprofit organizations in New York looking to be involved in our corporate giving program. Unfortunately, we're not doing much in New York, so we're not doing anything in New York, so we can't benefit those agencies. But there's a tremendous amount of good that's going on that I think if you came to one of our landowner meetings and talked to the people who are living right within the area who are experiencing this directly, you would hear a much different tone and attitude about the process, because we get touted by our landowners. They're very thankful, they're very happy, and frankly, they're ecstatic about the benefits they're seeing. Not just their own financial benefits, but the benefits of their communities, increasing jobs, increasing tax revenue, increasing the growth of small businesses. So I could paint an entirely different picture.
Do you have any comment on the methane migration issues? Theoretically, they're not supposed to happen, but they have happened, are happening.
What was
Methane
that?
migration, water bubble at Susquehanna, 6, 8, 10 water wells contaminated in Bradford County. Forget Dillon, it's happening with Chesapeake in Bradford County right now. The county commissioner is talking about water buffaloes. I had a neighbor, we have a own property in the midst of this in Susquehanna County, and one of my neighbors has land in Bradford. He says every time he drives over there, there's another water buffalo sitting in someone else's front yard, which means their wells are contaminated. It can't happen with steel casing, It's happening, so how's that going to change, be any different here?
Well, there have been cases of shallow layers of methane gas, which through the drilling process can stimulate that gas to have that flow. One thing that we've done recently, and I didn't bring mine, but I think out in the lobby, we have a sample of our casing system. We've actually improved our casing and cementing program. So we've now added that additional layer of steel casing that goes down about 2,500 feet, and cementing that into place, or cementing that production casing from total depth to surface. So those are things that have been changed and modified to address those issues with shallow layers of methane gas. And that's happening before drilling is even happening. We do water tests and find out that landowners have methane in their water before we even drill. There's a landowner here in Owego, New York. There's been no drilling within 5 miles of his home. I went to his house and lit his garden hose because he has methane gas in his water in Owego, New York. So it is prevalent before drilling even happens. It looks great in movies, lighting these taps and going, oh, that looks great in a movie. But when you talk about it being prevalent already here, it is happening.
I think two things that are certain out of that study that they seem to point out, and that is that the chemicals pumped inside the casing for the hydraulic fracturing in no way come in contact with the freshwater aquifer. I mean, they point that out a few times. The other thing is they say, regardless of whether it's near a well or outside of a well, I think the number is 85% of the wells have methane. And I think, I'd like, if I could get, if you have an email address, I'd like to send you the Rural Pennsylvania Water Report. Because I think what's happening in the world in general, we are becoming more aware of water. And I'm not saying if there's an accident or there's a spill or there's a drilling issue or something happens, that those things are bad. And the regulations and the activities and what the operators do are trying to prevent all that. That's what we do. But I think what we're finding out is the baseline of a lot of the water in New York and a lot of the water in Pennsylvania that's coming out of water wells isn't as good as we perceive. And we'll go out and do some baseline testing, and all of a sudden, when you find bad water, I mean, I have a responsibility as a businessman and as just a neighbor to tell the people, look, you can't drink this. And if we can help them, whether it's drill another water well or put a water buffalo in, I mean, we're neighbors in the neighborhood. We're going to work on that.
One last thing. I get to say something nice. One of the things that's interesting in Tioga County, we might know this for a fact because I've worked with Nick on a lot of the stuff that's in your proposed landowners lease. And in the group that I'm in Windsor, I noticed that there's very strict regulated requirements in our landowners lease for groundwater testing. And even, not just for well drilling and stuff like that, but even in pipeline and stuff. I can tell you this for a fact. We've got a pipeline being built through my township now, the Laser Northeast pipeline, and one of the things in our easement with the Laser Northeast people is we required water testing all along the line and a ways away from the line too. And we're getting that data back now. There's no drilling in the Windsor Township. There's no drilling anyplace. We have methane. We're finding methane in the waters. About 60% of the wells that are tested already have methane in them. Whether you'll get more methane or not, I think that one of the things that Duke study brought up was that the well construction stuff needs to be looked at so that you don't really increase the methane and stuff. And one of the things in New York State, those of you who have looked at the New York State well regulations, and John can certainly talk to them more than I have. New York State has a great record on gas migration. And one of the reasons they have a great record on gas migration is because their well construction methods were a little farther ahead of Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania took off on this stuff.
Yes.
Yes, my name is Bob Ponsick, and I'm the chairman of the Industrial Gas Coalition. And I first of all wanted to thank the group, and especially the JLC and staff for facilitating another great educational opportunity. Secondly, I wanted to give you an invitation to another great educational opportunity. Vessel has tried to have as many opportunities as we could for our membership and the community at large. And if you have your pen and pencil so you can take the note when I finish up here, but the date's going to be May 25th. It's a Tuesday. And the topic is Bradford County Ground Zero. And some of the concerns I've heard tonight are very adequately addressed. It's an extremely well-balanced presentation. The presenter is the director or the manager of the Soil Conservation Department, who affiliates very closely with Penn State University. And it is a very well-balanced, very informative presentation about real life in Bradford County. And it's interesting, the folks in Bradford County often say the further away you go from Bradford County, the worse the story gets. So I'll close with that. Thank you. May 25th is at the Clayton Avenue School in Vestal. 6:45, the presentation will start. I would advise you getting there perhaps a half an hour early. Mike will be there in the lobby. Our steering committee will be there to answer questions, and we're hoping for our auditorium, which is not quite this big. But it'd be great to see your faces there, and it is a great presentation.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Ken Lyons. I have a property in Redwood County, and I'm wondering what parameters of water testing they're actually doing. Because I've looked into, after we had our water tested, the parameters that they're using are for mud puddles
or the one, fine, I keep using the word, the next one coming out. But I think if you go to the DEC website, I mean, they have the hot water testing guidelines. And a lot of them follow the EPA and the Division of Water.
I work with environmental labs, so I do know the difference between the water testing standards. So when we got the results back, I said, wait a minute, these are the surface water testing. These aren't drinking water. We make sure New York gets tested for drinking water. Now,
I think Paul made a valid point. New York's a little
for surface water, but the levels that you're testing for, say for bearings or heavy metals, you get your heavy metals. A surface water may have a level up here, which sure we can do that easy, but the actual MCL, the maximum contamination level for drinking water is way down here, but we're testing up here. And so if our water is contaminated in the future, we can still be below that surface water, but still our drinking water says we're not supposed to be in that level.
Yeah, well, working for a lab, you'll understand the way New York approaches things. New York doesn't set limits. New York requires you to report results. You'll see the information regardless of the number, whether it's 0 or 10,000.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you test, say, 10,000, if your average person in here doesn't know what the maximum contamination level is, they're not going to say, 10,000 is that good, bad? Well, it's not that bad. They send the result to us. They're not going to know that unless we send them a set guidelines to say.
Oh, so you're not talking about what you're testing for. You're talking about people knowing what they're seeing.
They got to know, because if they don't know if you're testing for surface water, they don't know if you're testing for surface water.
Here's the issue. Here's the current issue in New York that's been discussed. So you understand where this is going, because New York's a data state. When we create information in New York, the question is, usually it goes to tax you, but under this circumstance, they really can't tax you on water testing. So the idea is who gets the information and what's done with it. The thought process now, and I have no idea if this is where it's going, is basically it's going to county health departments. It's going to be accumulated, summarized. You're going to, if the results go to your county health department and they don't meet the standards that you can drink, the health department will come to your house. So I think New York's a little bit of a different animal than Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania's learned a lot. We learned a lot from Pennsylvania, which maybe it was good.
Pennsylvania's quite tough. We just went through PAR, so we know that they're not easy. But like I said, if you're not testing your drinking water levels, you're not going to know if you're meeting or not.
Well, every test we run in New York requires all reported data. So you'll see whether it's drinking water level, you'll see whether it's mud puddle level, you'll see whether it's fishing stream level. You'll see the data, and it'll be basically summarized in the parts, depending on what you're looking at. It'll be parts per milligrams per liter or whatever.
Yeah, but the thing is, when it comes to the lab, they look at what you're requiring testing for. They don't look to see, it's a drinking water or whatever. But if you say that I want to test it for this stuff, that's what we're going to test it at. We're not going to test it, for a lower level most of the time.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see those types of tests in New York. That's what John is saying. And in addition to that being addressed at the SGIS, you can also go to the health department's website, and they have understandings there that address water testing. Here's the other issue too, whether Pennsylvania has this or not. And I say this to landowners all the time. Invest a little bit of money. Go out, get your own test done, have a company certify it to you, and explain to you exactly what happened so that you know exactly what your water quality is, and you're not relying upon a gas company to tell you that this is what it is. You've got those records. And I tell people that they should be doing that before, during, and after as well. Our later releases address those issues, so I'm not relying upon the state. I'm not relying upon anybody to tell me how the water test should be done. I've already got that in my lease. I'm sure Bob has that in his lease too.
Well, the thing is, how many of you guys are going to want to go drop $1,000 on the testing? It's close to $1 grand to get a decent test done. And so, how many, they're saying that they're going to test your water.
Well, that's where, we're talking about landowners who are bringing in a fair amount of money from this. And that's where I'm going to invest just a little bit to make sure that if you've got the questions that you've got, make sure that you've got that peace of mind as well, knowing that you've got the results certified to you.
Like I said, if they're doing the testing, it just seems kind of redundant, but waste of money.
Watch that issue closely when that final
term cumulative impact. And as I see Chesapeake's pattern developing, it looks like 2 wells at a time per pad. Move on to another pad, move on to another pad, move on to another pad. What it means for an area, you're talking about, what is it, 600 to 1,000 trucks for each frac job, is trucks, gravel trucks, water trucks are on the roads all the time. We go to our property in Pennsylvania once every couple of weeks to mow. In a couple of hours' time, that tiny slice of time, we're totally aware of the best activities going on. The people who live there, during a frac job, trucks are lined up for a mile or 2, idling 24 hours a day, 6 days. The 40 tanks that are brought in are enough to supply water, so there's supplemental trucks refilling them. So there's this activity that goes on.
These are all part of the cumulative impacts.
Right.
And these are issues that I think by the way, I think you're going to see, this is something that Joe Martin's talked about when we met with him. I think you're going to see some additional issues in the SGIS to address that. Can you talk a little bit about those impact issues?
I'll stop, but in terms of your developing all 6 wells, what's that timeline? I mean, if the pad behind their house and down there, or the property down there and down the road and so on, was done with, and they were never coming back, and then, a year from now, they're 5 miles away, but they're working the area, a year from now, 2 years from now, so this will be going on constantly for the next, what? How long does it take to do all 6 wells? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? You want that idea?
3 years. 3-year development.
3 years apart?
The New York, to get a 640-acre unit in New York, you have to supply with a 3-year development plan. So it has to be developed over that 3-year period. For 1 square mile. So after that, it's going to be more than 1 square mile away. If you're on the edge of that square mile, then you probably have to buy 2 units. But New York's law, this is the actual unit law, contains a clause to get a 640-acre unit. Okay, you provide them with a 3-year development plan.
On the cumulative impacts?
Let me just address cumulative impacts a little bit. Over the last 40 years, I've done a lot of cumulative impacts on a lot of different projects. And one of the things that's kind of interesting on cumulative impacts is people talk about what's the cumulative impact going to be. So cumulative impacts is kind of a what-if kind of scenario, and it's very difficult to do because one of the things that happens is, and I've been up in the last month and talked to the new commissioner a couple of times, and his staff there, and they're talking about in all of New York State, maybe 240 wells being done in a year, not 240 on your road. I'm talking about all these counties along here, about 240 wells probably being done in New York State. So you can do a cumulative impact on maybe on 240 wells because you can't really say what's going to happen until you actually start something. You start something and then maybe in your area you're going to have a well here and a well here and a well here and a well there. If after the first well is done, when they apply for well number 2, well pad number 2 or well pad number 3, then you can address the cumulative impacts. And we've got this here already, and this is what happened. If we do this over here, then this plus this will be the cumulative impact. But it's very difficult to do a cumulative impact on the whole state in the what-if scenario because the development's just not going to be that fast.
And the development will be unpredictable too. You may find that there are certain areas that are more productive than others. If you find that you drill a couple wells, like John, you drill a couple wells in an area that don't pan out, you're not going to have additional development in that area. Which makes it very different. The geology, the southern part of the state, a lot different than the geology that's up in Otsego County.
The cumulative impact, it's not like it's unknown. It is unknown.
Well, it is unknown until you actually get a development plan. It's sort of You actually have to go 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps. You can't just come in here, well,
You know how many trucks are servicing a well, you know that you're drilling 2 wells at a time, 3,000 feet apart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
The SGEIS will contain a detailed summary of that information because I was part of the group that put it together on all the vehicles, what happens if another well's not drilled, what happens if 2 wells are drilled on the same well. I mean, they went into a lot of detail putting information together. So you'll see the data. But I think what Bob says, when you start to make those assumptions, the what ifs, the positive what ifs and the negative what ifs, it's interesting how the cumulative just doesn't seem to explode as you would think. And the biggest way to get a cumulative impact is do everything at one time. Then you have this huge initial impact that you know. The cumulatives of doing things over time aren't that much because you have the offset of what's taking away on the other side.
I'm glad I don't live down there because they get the traffic. Will last a year and a half, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. The longer they stretch it out, the more these people work for.
You know,
And
let me
the
say,
money trumps that.
let me say that these are great questions, and these are questions that, as landowners, we're asking all the time. It should be asked. As we find out additional information, they should continue to be investigated. When we find these things out, for instance, we heard something that happened in Pennsylvania, we want our DEC to look at that. So keep those types of questions coming, and in that process, we will be able to improve this along the way. Yes?
I have a question for Mr. Yaggi. Mr. Yaggi, approximately 3 weeks ago, there was a publicized spill of frac fluid by Chesapeake, I believe, in Bradford County. A couple of questions with respect to that. I haven't seen in the media whether there's been any determination of what caused that. So I'd like to know if Chesapeake has made a determination as to what caused that. I also understand that frac spill was not contained at the well pad site. And in your presentation tonight, you indicated the burn and the containment. What happened? I mean, why did that frac fluid, why wasn't it contained? And is Chesapeake still suspending their operations with respect to fracking and drilling? What's going on right now?
Okay, you're referring to an incident on a site in Roy Township in Bradford County. We're in stage 2 of a frac procedure on a well that had been drilled. We had what was described as a equipment failure on the site, which I obviously didn't see it happen, but I was told it was a fitting on the wellhead failed. So it wasn't a human error, it was a piece of equipment that malfunctioned, created a leak at the wellhead. I've heard it been described in the media as an explosion or a massive blowout. It was better described as a leak, a substantial leak, but a leak. Also, regarding why that spill wasn't contained on that pad, because in a normal situation, those pads are self-contained, everything would be contained within the perimeter of that well pad. A lot of it because of the nature of that leak, going off to one side, kind of being expelled in one direction, broke through the berm, they went down the hill. It was quickly remediated. The berm was quickly reconstructed, and the containment was put back into place, preventing any additional fluid from expelling over the side of the berm. And also we had a substantial amount of rain. I think you recall during that week with a substantial amount of rain, which the ground was heavily saturated, so it did help. I guess is the best way to describe that. But regarding that, after that incident, we suspended all well completion operations voluntarily to examine the integrity of all of our equipment to make sure that that doesn't happen again, to reevaluate our containment process to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And it's incidents are going to happen here and there. I'm not going to come here and say nothing's ever going to happen. We will have an incident here and there. It's how a company responds and reacts and handles those incidents, which you should be looking at. And we were very quick to respond. We contained that site, took control of the well very quickly, and within a few days we were able to replace the wellhead and have an active well on that site again. So case that nothing's ever going to happen in industry. Things happen, not just in this industry, but every industry has things that happen. It's how companies respond and handle and mitigate those issues is what we should be looking at. And we handle that very, very well, very quickly.
Hi, Scott. You know who I am. I do a lot of research for the JLC. And my question is for the gentleman from Chesapeake. I get in a lot of conversations. I go to meetings on both sides. And the one question I'm always getting asked is about the Halliburton loophole in 2005. So the other night I spent 12 hours reading that law, which I think was 19804. It was introduced by Senator Williams from California, not Dick Cheney. And it was backed by 2 other senators from California. I guess my question is, why is it called the Halliburton loophole? And why would the head of the EPA at that time recommend that the fracking process be removed from the Safe Water Drinking Act? Well, from what I read in my research, I can answer that question. They recommended it because there were 1 million wells drilled. They never had any incident of groundwater contamination. Therefore, they removed it to say it was a cost-effective measure and nothing to do with the chain. Am I right or am I off the wall?
My thought on that is, I don't think it was ever exempted because it was never in to begin with. So you can't exempt something that wasn't involved with something. And there's a lot of talk about, well, what's in those top secret frac chemicals? What are those? What is that mixture? What are they pumping into the ground? And essentially, we've been giving fact sheets to provide the list of chemicals for 2 years now. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we just signed up with the Groundwater Protection Council to give on a well site by well site basis what's going into each frac procedure. So those concerns about the top secret chemicals and no one knows what they are, the loopholes and the exemptions and all that. Essentially, we're mitigating those concerns by providing that, making that information public, so that you can search in a database online through the Water Protection Council and find out what went into that water. So again, there's a lot of sensationalism about things in this industry, but when you look at the reality of how the industry has responded and is doing things differently than they may have done in 6 months, 12 months to 18 months ago. Things have been continually changing to address the concerns of the public.
Thank you.